The social worker's call came on a Tuesday morning in March. Her voice gentle but matter-of-fact, as she explained that my birth mother had passed away and left specific instructions for me to receive her personal belongings. I had been searching for her for 3 years, ever since my adoptive parents finally told me the truth on my 25th birthday, but I never imagined our first meeting would be in an empty apartment that still smelled faintly of lavender and old sorrow. The building sat on the outskirts of Portland, a modest brick structure with narrow hallways and thin walls that probably held 1,000 stories of struggle and survival. Mrs. Chen, the social worker, led me up 2 flights of stairs to apartment 2B, her keys jangling softly in the silence that seemed to follow us like a shadow. She had been kind enough to come with me, understanding that facing the remnants of a stranger's life, a stranger who was also my mother, might be more than I could handle alone. The apartment was smaller than my college dorm room had been, with windows that looked out onto a parking lot where weeds grew through cracks in the asphalt. Everything was neat and carefully arranged, as if she had been expecting company but wanted to make sure they wouldn't find any evidence of the chaos that sometimes lives inside a person's heart. A faded floral couch sat against one wall, facing a small television that looked like it hadn't been turned on in years. The kitchen was tiny but spotless, with a single coffee cup sitting upside down in the dish drainer, waiting for a morning that would never come. She asked that you look through everything, Mrs. Chen said softly, her hand resting briefly on my shoulder. Take whatever feels right to you. The rest will be donated. I nodded, not trusting my voice to remain steady, and began the strange ritual of getting to know someone through the objects they left behind. There wasn't much. Some clothes that smelled like the drugstore perfume she must have worn, a few books with pages soft from repeated reading, and a shoebox filled with photographs of people I didn't recognize but whose eyes held the same color as mine. But it was in the bedroom, in the bottom drawer of a nightstand that looked like it had been salvaged from a thrift store, that I found the manila envelope with my name written across it in handwriting that somehow looked familiar, though I had never seen it before. Inside the envelope were 3 things: a copy of my original birth certificate with both our names on it, a hospital bracelet so small it could have fit around my wrist when I was 7 years old, and a letter that had been folded and unfolded so many times the creases had worn soft as fabric. The paper was yellowed with age, and I could see where teardrops had fallen and dried, leaving faint water stains that spoke of nights when grief had overwhelmed the careful control she seemed to maintain in every other aspect of her life. I sat on the edge of her bed, the letter trembling in my hands, and for a moment I couldn't bring myself to unfold it. This was it, the answer to every question I had carried for 28 years, the explanation I had both longed for and feared. The afternoon light streaming through her bedroom window felt too bright, too ordinary for such a moment, so I got up and pulled the curtains closed, creating the kind of gentle twilight that seemed appropriate for reading words that had waited nearly 3 decades to be seen. The letter was dated June the 15th, 1995, exactly 1 month after I was born. And it began with the kind of careful formality that comes from not knowing how to address someone who is both everything and nothing to you. My dearest daughter, I don't know your name now. The family who took you home from the hospital 3 weeks ago promised to send updates through the agency, but I haven't heard anything yet, and I find myself imagining what they might have called you. Something beautiful, I hope. Something that will help you grow up feeling loved and wanted and worthy of all the good things this world has to offer. I am writing this letter at 2:30 in the morning, sitting at my kitchen table in the apartment I moved to after I left the group home for unwed mothers. It's not much, just 2 rooms and a bathroom with a window that won't close all the way, but it's mine. And for the first time in my 19 years, I have a place where no one can tell me what to do or how to feel or whether I'm allowed to grieve for the choice I made. Because I am grieving, sweet girl. I want you to know that. I don't want you to grow up thinking that giving you away was easy for me, or that I did it because I didn't love you enough. The truth is exactly the opposite. I loved you so much that it felt like dying when I signed those papers, but I loved you enough to want something better for you than what I could give. Let me tell you about the day you were born, because I want someone to remember it the way I do, even if you can't. It was a Thursday morning in May, and I had been in labour for 14 hours. The nurses kept telling me to push harder, to breathe differently, to stop crying. But I couldn't stop because every contraction brought me closer to the moment when you would no longer be mine. I had felt you moving inside me for months, had talked to you and sang to you and promised you things I knew I couldn't keep. And the thought of holding you and then letting you go felt like volunteering to have my heart cut out. But then you arrived, all red and angry and perfect, and they placed you on my chest for exactly 90 seconds before taking you to the nursery to be cleaned up and checked over. 90 seconds. I have counted them 1,000 times since then. And I can tell you that in those 90 seconds, I memorized the shape of your tiny nose and the way your fingers curled around mine and the sound you made that was half cry and half sigh, as if you were disappointed to discover that the world was colder and brighter than the warm darkness where you had lived for 9 months. The social worker had explained everything to me during those long months when we were planning for your arrival. She had shown me pictures of your new family, a couple in their 30s who had been trying to have children for 7 years, who had a house with a white picket fence and a golden retriever, and the kind of stability I had never known. They had good jobs and college degrees and a savings account, and all the things that seemed like impossible dreams to a 19-year-old girl whose own mother had kicked her out the day she discovered the pregnancy. I met them once, before you were born. We sat in a conference room at the agency, and they were so kind, so gentle with me, so careful not to make me feel like they were taking something that belonged to me. They asked about my medical history and whether I wanted them to tell you about me someday. And when I said yes, the woman, your mother, reached across the table and squeezed my hand and promised that they would make sure you knew you were loved twice. Once by the woman who gave birth to you, and again by the woman who would raise you. I believed her. I still believe her. But believing something and feeling peace about it are 2 very different things. And I need you to know that not a day has passed since you were born that I haven't wondered what you look like now, whether you're healthy and happy, whether you ever think about me and wish things had been different. I need you to know why I made the choice I did, because someday you might want to understand, and I might not be there to explain it to you. My own mother was 16 when she had me, and she kept me, and it destroyed both of our lives. We moved from apartment to apartment, from man to man, from crisis to crisis, and I grew up believing that love was something that hurt you. That family was something you endured rather than enjoyed. By the time I was your age, brand new in this world, she was already so bitter and exhausted that she could barely look at me without resentment. I swore I would never do that to you. I swore that if I ever had a child, I would make sure that child had everything I had been denied: stability, security, parents who chose to be parents instead of people who were just trying to survive their own childhood mistakes. When I found out I was carrying you, I was living in my car and working 2 part-time jobs that barely paid enough for gas and food. Your father was 18 years old and more scared than I was. And when I told him about you, he emptied his savings account, handed me $300, and asked me never to contact him again. I could have kept you anyway. I could have figured it out somehow, the way women have been figuring it out since the beginning of time. But every time I imagined raising you the way I had been raised, in poverty and uncertainty and fear, I felt like I was already failing you before you even drew your first breath. You deserved parents who were ready for you, who had dreamed of you, who could give you opportunities and experiences and love that felt safe instead of desperate. So I chose them for you, and in doing so, I chose to love you in the most painful way possible, by letting you go. The hardest part wasn't signing the papers or leaving the hospital empty-handed. The hardest part was coming home to this quiet apartment and realizing that my body still thought you were coming back. For weeks after you were born, I would wake up in the middle of the night reaching for you, my arms aching with the phantom weight of the child I had held for 90 seconds and would never hold again. I would hear babies crying in the grocery store and feel my milk let down, my body betraying me with reminders of what I had given up. I started writing you letters then, one every month on the 15th, because that was the day you were born and it seemed important to mark it somehow. I wrote about the seasons changing and the books I was reading and the job I got at the library downtown. I wrote about the college classes I started taking at night, determined to make something of myself so that if you ever came looking for me, you would find someone worth finding. I wrote about the therapy sessions where I learned that loving someone sometimes means making choices that break your heart but heal theirs. But I never sent any of the letters. What would have been the point? You had a life now, a family, a future that didn't include me, and the last thing I wanted was to disrupt that with my own selfish need to maintain some connection to you. The letters were for me, a way to process the grief and guilt and love that had no place to go. Writing them helped me feel like I was still your mother in some small way, even though I had given up the right to claim that title. I kept writing to you as you grew older, imagining what you might look like at 5 and 10 and 15. I wrote about your first day of school and your first lost tooth, and all the milestones I would miss. I wrote about hoping your parents were reading you bedtime stories and teaching you to ride a bike and making sure you knew how special you were. I wrote about the dreams I had where you were happy and confident and surrounded by people who adored you. And I wrote about the nightmares where you were alone and wondering why your birth mother hadn't wanted you. Because I did want you. I want you to know that above everything else, I wanted you so much that it felt like drowning. But I wanted your happiness more than I wanted to keep you. And sometimes love requires that kind of sacrifice. I'm writing this particular letter because I've been thinking about the future lately. About what will happen to all these words I've been saving for you, if something happens to me. I've decided to stop writing the monthly letters, not because I love you less, but because you're 6 months old now, and it's time for me to start building a life that isn't entirely defined by missing you. But I wanted to leave you this one letter, this explanation in case you ever come looking for answers. If you're reading this, it means I'm gone, and I'm sorry for that. I'm sorry that we'll never get to sit across from each other over coffee and fill in all the years between your birth and this moment. I'm sorry that you'll never get to hear me tell you in person how proud I am of the person I know you've become. I'm sorry that I can't be there to see you graduate and get married and have children of your own if that's what you choose to do. But I'm not sorry for the choice I made. I hope you understand that. I hope your life has been everything I dreamed it would be when I placed you in your mother's arms that day in the hospital. I hope you've been loved and cherished and encouraged to reach for every star in the sky. I hope you've never doubted, even for a moment, that you were wanted and treasured and celebrated, even by the woman who gave you life and then gave you away. You are the best thing I ever did, sweet girl. You are my greatest love and my greatest gift to the world. I may not have raised you, but I will always, always be proud to be the woman who brought you into existence. Love always and forever, your first mother, Sarah Marie Collins, P.S. I named you Grace in my heart because that's what you were to me, a moment of pure grace in a life that hadn't known much of it. I hope your real name suits you just as well. I don't know how long I sat there on her bed, the letter clutched in my hands as tears fell onto the same pages where hers had fallen 28 years earlier. The sun had set completely while I was reading, and the room was dark except for the streetlight outside her window that cast everything in a pale, ethereal glow that seemed appropriate for such a sacred moment. Grace. She had named me Grace, and somehow that felt like the first gift she had ever given me, even though I had been called Emma since the day my adoptive parents brought me home from the hospital. Emma Grace Harrison, the name on my driver's license and my college diploma and my marriage certificate, but Grace had been my first name, chosen by the woman who had carried me for 9 months and loved me enough to let me go. I thought about all the times I had wondered about her, all the questions I had carried like stones in my pockets. Why had she given me away? Had she ever thought about me? Had she regretted her decision? Did she love me? The letter answered everything and nothing, filled in the blanks but created new ones, gave me peace but also a fresh kind of grief for the relationship we would never have. She had been dead for 6 months, Mrs. Chen had told me. A heart attack at 47, sudden and merciful, the kind of death that takes you before you have time to be afraid. She had been working at the same library for 15 years, had earned a degree in social work, had dedicated her life to helping other young women navigate the impossible choices she had once faced herself. She never married, never had other children, but her co-workers described her as kind and thoughtful, someone who remembered birthdays and brought soup when people were sick and always had time to listen when someone needed to talk. She had lived a quiet life, purposeful but solitary, and I found myself wondering if she had ever been happy or if missing me had coloured everything else with a sadness she couldn't shake. The apartment didn't give me any clues. It was neither cheerful nor depressing, just the home of someone who had learned to find contentment in small things and simple pleasures. As I prepared to leave that night, I looked around one more time, trying to memorize the space where she had lived and thought about me and written letters she never sent. I took the photographs and the letter and the tiny hospital bracelet, but I left everything else for Mrs. Chen to donate. It felt wrong to take the physical remnants of a life I hadn't been part of. But the letter was mine, had always been mine, even when I didn't know it existed. I drove home through the dark streets of Portland, the letter safe in my purse next to my wallet, and for the first time in 3 years of searching, I felt like I knew who I was. Not just Emma Harrison, the adopted daughter who had been loved and raised well, but Grace Collins, the baby who had been loved so much that her teenage mother had made the hardest choice imaginable to ensure her happiness. The next morning, I called my adoptive mother and told her about the letter, reading it to her over the phone while she cried on the other end of the line. When I finished, she was quiet for a long moment before she said, "She was right, you know. You were wanted. You were celebrated. And you were loved twice. Once by the brave young woman who gave you life, and again by your father and me, who were given the privilege of raising you. I keep the letter in my nightstand drawer now, next to the hospital bracelet that is so small I can barely believe my wrist was ever tiny enough to fit through it. Sometimes, when I'm having a hard day or feeling lost or uncertain about the choices I'm making, I take it out and read Sarah Marie Collins's words again. And I remember that I come from a line of women who loved fiercely and sacrificed greatly and found strength in the most impossible circumstances. I named my own daughter Grace Sarah, and someday, when she's old enough to understand, I'll tell her about the grandmother she'll never meet, but who loved her before she was even born, who chose courage over fear and hope over despair, who gave her granddaughter the greatest gift one person can give another, a chance at the life she was meant to live. The letter that was never sent found its way to me anyway, 28 years late, but exactly when I needed to receive it. Love, I learned, doesn't need a postage stamp to reach its destination. Sometimes it just needs time and faith, and the kind of patience that only mothers, all kinds of mothers, truly understand.